Hello, I'm Matthew Che Cowell from Majestic Collaborations, and we're talking today about the San Juan Art of Mass Gatherings over December 1st and 2nd, 2022. We worked with Performing Arts Readiness and Alliance for Response in Puerto Rico, Puerto Rico's HENTEF program through FEMA and the Smithsonian. We're hosted by Gretchen Ruiz Ramos and Soraya from the Alliance for Response, and the Taller de la Goico, which is a school that was repurposed as a performing arts resiliency hub. The lineup of speakers was pretty amazing. We had some of the smartest folks working in arts, culture, and emergency response on the island. Arturo from Casa del Pueblo, which was the gold standard for community-based microgrids for solar and homes. They have a radio station and theater in Adjuntas, but Arturo was up in San Juan talking. That was very exciting. We were excited to have Chef Jose Enrique from San Juan talking about his experience as a chef in the intersection of culinary arts and disaster response. He helped serve 7,000 people, refugee sites in Poland from the Ukraine conflict. Mavi was wonderful. The independent living organization that Zaida was a speaker there that I'm excited to have Jessica talk about in a moment. And then just overall, La Goico is this hub in San Juan for La Plena music. They have a museum there, and as a music forum and a community organizing hub, the place was amazing, and they hosted us for their holiday party. And so that was our site for studying a mass gathering and understanding the community that puts that together. It went great. You know, the folks who were there were a great mix of artists and playwrights and event producers and emergency managers and historic preservationists and chefs and circus. The organization that hosted us offered us a lot of chances to study their built environment of this school that had been repurposed. And they basically told the government, this is such a magnificent community resource. Can we have the school? They earned it, and they now operate it as a collective. Well, let's take a quick look at the San Juan, Puerto Rico event, Creative Resilience. I'll go ahead and walk you through the website a little bit right now. Here's a picture of those who participated. We had excellent translation services from Orlando, who works with a performing arts organization that also does advocacy for people with disabilities, and he speaks 4 languages. You can see him there in the light green shirt in the middle. Other speakers of the day were Gretchen Ruiz Ramos from FEMA and HENTEF. She spoke about asset mapping. We did a great asset mapping exercise at Art of Mass Gatherings we can get into in a moment. Soraya Serra spoke about preservation of historic and cultural artifacts. Dr. Arturo Masol spoke about the history of the Casa Pueblo organization at the interior city of Adjuntas. Zaida Ramos Chariez spoke about Mavi and the Institute for Independent Living. Tom Clarison spoke about the history of the organizations for response on the island and performing arts readiness, which was our sponsor for the event. Mariana Reyes talked about the La Plena Museum, about the history of Tito Matos and the organization coming together around that music. And then Will Hegard from the Footprint Project. We came out early together. The two of us went to the southern city of Ponce, where there was a Pesebre, is the name of a community organization, quite similar in a lot of ways to La Goico, where they took over an old school that had a perimeter, secure perimeter fence. And then inside they set up all of these clinics and dog and cat kennel and laundry and kitchen and 2 stages, and created basically a refugee area from the earthquakes and the hurricanes that have affected the southern part of the island so badly. And they had a trailer with batteries that were non-functional. So we took the trailer, we brought it up to San Juan, and then replaced the batteries, and then used that as a hands-on skill sharing workshop to go over the 4 pillars. And we can go into each one of those as you like. We had 2 large maps of the island that were black and white, one on the tables. We divided it into 2 groups. We asked people to do some mapping, starting personally. You can see here the way Jenny made this art. You know, you start with yourself, and then you move out into your city, your state, and then what you know nationally or internationally. We had some college students who were doing experiential learning that were joined us. And then Allison there, who's a researcher with her phone out, has done like how equity is impacted during disaster for how to respond response goes. We had lots of these neat stickers that we brought of the 4 pillars. We made some in Spanish, and then stickers were then color coordinated for our 4 pillars of sustainability, accessibility, community engagement, and safety. And so we asked, what are the assets that you know of on the island for sustainable organizations, whether it's knowledge or a physical asset, where do they exist on the island in those 4 pillars? And so you see Tom and Soraya mapping there. That fellow in the upper right is Wayne. He's a playwright from New York who was excited to think about this intersection. We have a great interview with him that we'll be sharing later. Then once these were put onto these 2 different tables, kind of worked out their own versions of it, then we put them up on the wall and we compared them. And we said, what's different from the map that table A and table B made? She's pointing out right there a LGBTQ organization that's on its feet on that part of the island. Also, they did theater work. These young women are event producers as well. What was pretty cool, I thought, was to look at their version of assets versus this fellow, I think, helped start the Alliance for Response in Puerto Rico. And he gave a big overview of here's, traditionally what's known as the island's assets of arts and cultural places. But I don't know if he knew about the LGBTQ theater groups. So it was all right, this is a good real-time learning of these asset maps, so that people with different experiences can share what they know. Well, the end of the day went into this solar trailer and solar discussion. And I would say that it was smart that we saved it till the end because everybody just really lit up. And so Gabi here owns a solar company that provided the batteries that were replaced by Will and I in the solar trailer. That's Will speaking. The 2 of them gave a presentation about, the state of solar rebuilding in Puerto Rico. It's quite complex. One of the questions people asked right off the bat, we took a high vantage point up on this staircase, and then we were able to look at those solar panels on the Lagoico kitchen roof, and they have 2 large Tesla batteries in the kitchen that power the event. People then, we went and looked at the solar trailer that we did the battery swap on. Those are lockers that you can put your phone inside, and so during a disaster, that's one of the things, when you lose power and you need to have your phone charged, then you can walk away. You put it in the locker, you put a lock on it, and then when you come back, your phone's charged. It's a pretty cool design. Let me show you a quick video that maybe you can superimpose later. So I think for asset mapping, one of the things that was nice here was, where do these solar trailers exist on the island? These young event producers were like, is this something that we could borrow? And they were like, yeah, for sure. Why don't you use this trailer in the future for your special events?
Uno a uno, y luego integrar todo al grid es muy costoso para cambiarlo todo el tiempo. Entonces, yo pienso de eso como un sistema off-grid móvil que reemplaza un generador de fósiles. Entonces, es un tema diferente de Tesla, Greta y sistemas allá. Son instituciones diferentes, leyes diferentes. Entonces, todavía tenemos
So the questions that came up a lot were like, okay, so if I'm, able to get a loan to put solar panels on my roof from the solar company, is this a good way to go? And then Gabi would be like, well, upside is if you don't have credit, you're going to be able to get solar on your roof and have some sustainability in your home. Downside is the way that financing works is you're going to have to pay for it 3 times over those, that 20 or 30-year loan. It's a $12,000 system. You're going to pay $36,000 by the time it's over. So if you have a credit union, this might be a better way to finance it. Also, if you have that system on your house, what is the capacity? What can that handle? And so then we talked a little bit about how to do a home energy audit and understand, what your batteries can power if you lose grid power, like how much capacity one of those systems will provide for your household. Casa Pueblo, it was interesting too to see that they did a lot of systems like this prioritized for people with disabilities around the little mountain town of Adjuntas. So I think they've installed over 100 of these home systems, but part of the contract for getting that home system would be, first it's needs based, but then it says if we have a power outage, you agree that your home can be a community hub so that people can come and charge their phones and do other stuff at this system that we're going to give you for free. There was this, there was also a good three-stream recycling, composting, trash station at the event. There was a lot on sustainability. Jessica can share a lot about the accessibility program. Maybe while we've got her, we can jump in and have her run through some of that. And Jessica, I can be on standby if you want me to show some pictures or anything like that while you're talking.
My name is Jessica Wallach, and I'm the accessibility coordinator here at the Art of Mass Gathering. So we recently went to Puerto Rico and had an event at this incredible space called La Goica, which is a community arts center that grew out disaster response to Maria. I really wanted to take advantage of the fact that we were in a place that has been really experiencing a number of disasters and needing to respond to test out our theory. We say that disaster response needs the same skills, resources, and know-how as event producing. The Art of Mass Gathering at San Juan was particularly juicy because we could talk really about the disaster response side. We invited Mavi and particularly, but Sarah, who's the executive director there, to talk us through disaster response from the perspective of people with disabilities and accessibility. She started her presentation by talking about how disasters just are inclusive by nature. They do not discriminate. They come in and they affect each and every one of us. However, disaster response is not inclusive and does often discriminate and often one size fits all and only meets some people's needs and not all people's needs. In fact, the UN says that people with disabilities are 2 to 4 times more affected by disasters than anybody else. So if you have a disability, and particularly a disability that's electricity dependent, then you are at much higher risk of having outcomes of disasters. And so she talked about how people need to personally be ready for disasters, and then how as organizations we can be ready to come in and assist. What we need to know as disaster response organizations so that we can be ready. And then I talked about a festival I organized at the Kennedy Center for and by artists with disabilities. And I talked about all the things we needed to do and think about to make that festival accessible, because we both had artists with disabilities and patrons with disabilities. And so I was trying to show how these two mass gatherings are similar. And then at the end, we had somebody, our interpreter who does a lot of work in art and accessibility, talk about what he heard, and he talked about a recent case. I had 3 questions for organizing the accessibility presentations. 1, who are we making our events accessible to? We're always making them accessible to somebody, and how do we widen that circle? What happens when we do actually center on disability? How does that both change these numbers the UN puts out of how much we're affected, and then how does it make disaster response more accessible to everybody and festivals more accessible to everybody? And then I had a 3rd question. Oh, what if we could make our spaces a love letter to the body? So what if we made all of our events thoughtful about everybody's bodies, minds, language? So she presented on disaster, and then she gave us a whole list of things to think about for festival events, including transportation,
I've got a couple too. I guess if we can ham and egg it, we had a neat surprise at the end of it where Will and I were circling the building to drop off the trailer like 6 times in rush hour. We noticed there was like 4 bicycles in the street, and so I sort of clumsily got into the conversation and said, what's the average trip length here in the city? It seems like it's a mile or two, and it seemed like people were like, yeah, that is probably the average trip length, and the weather is always pretty darn good. So like, why aren't there more bicycles? Well, the streets aren't safe, is kind of common. But, I've seen this in cities around the country. And my old work was that all kinds of cities are ridiculous for bicycles, but there first has to start like a desire. And like, how does that turn then sometimes into festivals where people go, let's create this like really positive version of environmentalism that becomes more inclusive and talks about a sustainable design, accessible design. We got into this good conversation about like, well, what would be like a highly involved community festival idea and how might we do that together? That was pretty juicy and fun. Casa Pueblo has done some like large events in the past, protests that are evolving for sovereignty of the island and for not being polluted by mining operations and stuff like that now is like a positive solar festival. But I thought it was surprising to think, oh boy, here we are kind of coming back to this idea of what would be a community involved festival that brings this stuff back into focus again. And sometimes the only way to do it is to like throw a new one. So that was kind of exciting. There was surprises on Saturday of visiting an accessibility focused festival. It was the International Day for Accessibility Rights. And so there was a festival in the kind of big park south of San Juan. The government of Puerto Rico, or this maybe park in particular, are under a lawsuit currently for not having accessibility. So it was a complex moment to sort of walk into where there's government organizations trying to do some outreach or perhaps kind of mend some fences or, appear to have everything figured out. I don't know. It's an interesting time to participate in those sort of gatherings. Jessica has got some thoughts, I'm sure.
Yeah, so let's see. I have to say, Arturo, who spoke before the accessibility panel, really teed us up well. He talked a lot about the impact of disaster on people with disabilities. He kept using that as the example of why we need to be prepared and why we need to be off the grid and why we need to have solar. And that was really, really exciting for me to see that I'm not the only one thinking about this and that disability organizations aren't the only ones thinking about this, but that there is a community of disaster response and community organizers thinking about everybody and what does that look like and what happens that we need to center on people with disabilities. That makes sense. Saturday was really neat to see this festival and see how they thought about safety and how they thought about sustainability and how they thought about accessibility and community engagement. They did an incredible job engaging the different communities of folks with disabilities in San Juan. We are not one community. And so I was very impressed with the number of different communities that were represented. It was interesting to see where the accessibility went really well, and then like how there were things that were problems like pebble ground covering or a lip of the asphalt and not having the booth right up to the asphalt. You were in a wheelchair, you got stuck in between the booth and the asphalt if you were coming up to say hello and talk to people. They had lots of interpreting companies represented, but they only had 3 interpreters for the whole event, and they expected 2,000 people at this event. That's a lot of folks to interpret for. So that was really interesting.
So one of the things we say with the Art of Mass Gatherings approach is that a sustainability problem let go too long becomes a safety problem. Accessibility problems let go can become safety problems real fast. In Puerto Rico, these things feel a lot less theoretical than they do in places that may have experienced less impacts of climate change and earthquakes and hurricanes and all of that on top of themselves. So, something like fuel efficiency, like generators, yes, it's sustainable, but it's also becomes a safety issue because on the island, it can be supply chain issues are a challenge. For instance, I don't think they've had bananas on the island since Maria. You're eating what's available, what food is there. Good point that Chef Enrique said was the food that he chose to make after the disaster, a lot of it was like roots and some vegetables that were still under the ground and weren't blown away during the hurricane. So that's what went into the soup. I thought that was pretty interesting. Safety is in the mix in a much more real way than festivals that are just having fun. And then you're planning for things that generally don't happen that are unsafe. In this case, safety is amongst all the other issues. There was a power outage during one of the evenings, one of the phases of power for the whole neighborhood was out. It was kind of a strange power outage where some lights were on, some were flickering, some were off. I hadn't experienced a phase loss in a power grid before and seen what that was like to, and where we were staying. Band flipped a circuit at the end of the night and the crowd just went on singing, the band playing acoustically. We heard some warnings early on about it was sort of strange to be careful not to flirt with anybody's lover or you could be killed. We heard that warning twice from two different people. It was sort of, I don't know that that's needs to make the cut on big picture stuff, but I guess, there's definitely, it's a different culture. It's a rich culture and it has its own feeling. Other safety stuff, Will and I needed to recommission that trailer in Ponce and somebody had left a trailer hitch lock on the roof, which luckily we got up and noticed it was stuck in the solar panels before we hit the highway, making sure that got replacement tires before we did the cross island trip. A lot of the roads were washed out on the way back north of Adjuntas to Arecibo. Your maps weren't leading you to roads that were in existence anymore. Often, you take a left turn and there's a washed out bridge or something like that. The interior of the island definitely still recovering at a much slower rate than the northern cities. And that's where there was the most loss of life in the last couple of years, was people without power or water in those areas, from what Gretchen told us. Community engagement, I would maybe start with La Plena music as an interesting window into something. At least for me, what I saw was that there was a lot of people, there were professional, kind of quote unquote professional bands, but then there was also these rhythm groups of people playing as a community band. And so La Plena music is a community-based music form with comedy, and it has this entry point, it really seemed to me, for people of really high skill or high practice who can improvise and sing over the top of it and play a drum, just in a free flowing way. And then there's other people who have some rhythm forms that are a little easier to learn. And then everybody can kind of be in this band. Here you see different abilities kind of all welcome up to the stage to play. Pretty amazing. And then Tito Matos was the kind of patron saint at this point. He passed away 8 months ago. He's the boy and Gold's dad. He was the La Plena singer who died of a heart attack. Smithsonian just did a retrospective on him that's a really cool video to see and to understand this music form. Summing up, Puerto Rico's community engagement can be understood to some extent through La Plena and how egalitarian it feels for people to participate in the music and the call and response and the different instruments and the way that it's current events and improvisation. To me, it was a revelation and a place I want to go back to and study from the Planeras and the Planeros, the teachers of this music form. I thought of friends in the States like Reggie Watts and other improvisational musicians, and thinking of crossing some of these streams between new jazz, hip hop, comedy, civil rights, community theater. It's rich. It's a really rich place, and I'm still thinking about it every day. It was intense for me to kind of go through the mom, Mariana, whose son was in that gold jacket. That kid is now a teacher of La Plena in his dad's tradition. But Mariana is the director of the organization, hosting everybody there. And people were just having tears like all the time thinking about the loss of Tito, right? And so we were at an event that had layers of emotion and Christmas coming and sharing music and sharing food and grieving the loss of this pillar of the community. The governor was out. The streets were filled with thousands of people 8 months ago when he died. You know, it was a big deal. So then I'm asking Mariana, like, hey, we've got this bingo. We got free lottery tickets for people who want to do the, you know, the out of mass gatherings bingo. And so asking her if she would help with that, but knowing that she's going through these high seas emotionally of this whole thing made me kind of realize just grown up stuff, you know, isn't all fun and games, you know, but it's also fun and games have a place in it, you know, to help people have some playfulness around studying the design of events. And I felt pretty excited. You know, the interview with Wayne is worth checking out. He's a playwright, and he said that he really appreciated the music at the beginning to sort of bring art into it. They're talking about culinary arts in the middle, talking about historic preservation of cultural stuff. He really seemed to get the art of mass gatherings ethos of using the non-traumatic times to think about response made sense to him. So it feels good. Feels like it's working. I think that an opportunity to return to the island and learn some more from folks there would be just a blessing. And I do think that the opportunity to do a park audit, if they're going to have some infrastructure improvements there, would just be an honor. Love to do that. Return with Footprint Project and their solar trailers. One of the things Will and I talked about is Footprint Project has had money to put together some trailers or to build a network like trailers like Max that from North Carolina. But what often happens is these trailers go to an organization and then they are not used for a number of months or years, and then they fall into some disrepair. Finding ways to keep those actively getting used, there's a really good dynamic adjacency into these special events. And so it gives everybody a chance to practice on the equipment, make sure it's still working, and then use those solar trailers to activate community events and music, food, youth, outdoors, arts. This is a good time to get our hands and our gear, you know, keep stuff in shape and do some exercises. Build familiarity into, you know, what's it like to make food for 100 people or 200 people. Or there was some really cool concepts coming from Enrique about trying to cook for people in the Ukraine and to understand how to make food that touched people, made them feel comfortable, familiar, you know, maybe went back to some of the food that they made them feel taken care of. That's an interesting thought, right? The arts of understanding how to go into a complex moment and meet it with soul food of various kinds, you know? Soul food can be music, can be dancing, it can be your kids having a chance to play and you can just talk. It's interesting how that festival is so analogous, and it's a gift I hope to keep exploring and